The funeral pods drifted past the large window like slow-moving stars. 12 of them, made of crystal that caught the light and scattered it into tiny rainbows. Inside each one lay the body of someone who had been alive just 3 days ago. Someone who had laughed, dreamed, and made plans for the future. Commander Park stood alone at the observation deck of Station Helix 7, her hands clasped behind her back. She wore her Terran Federation uniform with its neat lines and silver buttons, but today it felt heavy on her shoulders. Around her, dozens of alien species had gathered to watch the procession. Some whispered prayers in languages she did not understand. Others simply stared with their many eyes, their tentacles, their strange and beautiful faces. But was not watching the pods, she was watching a woman. The woman was a species known for their glowing skin that changed color with their emotions. Normally shimmered like living opals, shifting between soft blues and gentle purples. But this woman's skin was gray, dull, dead-looking. She knelt on the floor near the window, her thin arms wrapped around a small child, and she did not move. She did not speak. She simply existed in her grief like a stone sinking in deep water. The child in her arms was perhaps 3 years old by human counting, a little girl with round cheeks and large eyes that had once been bright but now looked empty and confused. She kept turning her head, searching for faces that would never appear again. Her mother, her father, her older brother, all of them were in those crystal pods, floating away into the darkness of space. Her name had learned this from the official reports, the only survivor of the engine malfunction that had destroyed the transport ship. She had been found in an escape pod, unconscious but alive, her mother's body curled around her like a shield. The woman holding her was called. She was not family. She was a friend who had traveled on the same ship, visiting relatives on a distant world. She had survived because she had been in a different section when the explosion happened. Now she held as if the child might disappear if she let go. Watched as 2 officials in the gray uniforms of the Galactic Union approached. They moved with the careful steps of people who knew they were about to cause pain but had decided to do it anyway. One of them held a tablet device. The other carried a small case that recognized a medical kit for sedation. Her stomach turned cold. She knew what was coming. Everyone knew. The Galactic Union had laws about orphan children of certain species, and they were among them. When a child lost their entire family unit, they were to be returned to something called the on their planet. It was a government facility that raised children who had no one else. It sounded kind when you read about it in official documents. Words like care and support and community appeared many times. But had read other documents, classified ones that she was not supposed to see, reports from intelligence officers who had visited the and come back with troubled eyes. The children there were not raised, they were processed. Their memories of their families were erased through a procedure that the government called emotional. Their personalities were smoothed away like rough edges on a stone. They emerged as adults who worked hard, asked no questions, and never wondered why they felt so empty inside. The officials reached. One of them spoke in a calm, professional voice that carried across the quiet observation deck. "Citizen, we are here to take custody of the minor child designated. As per Galactic Union Code 7749, subsection 12, all orphan minors must be transferred to the within 5 standard days of the death of their final family member." Looked up, her gray face twisted with something that might have been anger or despair or both. She is not a package to be transferred. She is a child. She is scared. She needs. "The law is clear," the official said, not unkindly. "You have no legal standing. You are not a blood relative. You are not a registered guardian. You have no claim to this child. Her mother was my closest friend. Before she died, she made me promise to take care of. She made me swear. Promises between individuals do not override Galactic Union law." The official held out the tablet. "Please place your identification marker here to confirm the transfer." Watched hands shake as she pulled closer. The little girl had started to cry, soft hiccuping sounds that made his chest hurt. Around the observation deck, dozens of species watched the scene with expressions that ranged from curiosity to discomfort to nothing at all. Some turned away. Others kept watching like it was entertainment. No one stepped forward. No one spoke up. The law was the law, and the law said this child belonged to a machine that would grind her down into something useful and empty. Had seen this before. Not exactly this, but close enough. During the Terran Unification Wars, she had watched governments take children from their families in the name of security. She had seen camps where those children were taught to forget their parents, their homes, their names. She had fought against those governments. She had won. But that had been a war. This was peacetime, and in peacetime you were supposed to follow rules even when those rules were wrong. Finally pressed her thumb to the tablet. Her skin flickered once, a brief flash of purple that might have been rage, before going gray again. The officials nodded and turned to take from her arms. The little girl screamed. It was not a loud scream. It was small and broken, the sound of a creature too young to understand why the world kept hurting her. She reached for with tiny hands, fingers grasping at empty air. "No, no, no," she cried, the word repeating like a prayer that no one was answering. Collapsed to her knees, her own arms empty now, her body folding in on itself like paper in a fire. She made no sound. Her grief was too big for sound. The galaxy watched her mourn alone. Stood very still. Her training told her to stay calm, to remain professional, to accept that some things were beyond her control. She was a commander in the Terran Federation, a guest on this station, subject to Galactic Union authority. She had no jurisdiction here, no power, no right to interfere. But she kept seeing's face, those empty, searching eyes, that small hand reaching for someone, anyone, to save her. She kept hearing the echo of another child's scream from 20 years ago, a child she had failed to save, a room she still could not enter. Turned away from the window and walked toward the exit. Her boots made sharp sounds against the floor. Her heart beat steady and slow, the way it always did when she had made a decision that would change everything. The officials were taking to a temporary holding area. The transfer to Velar Prime would happen tomorrow, one standard day, 24 hours. It was not much time, but it was enough. Had not survived the Unification Wars by following rules that destroyed innocent people. She had not earned her command by accepting that some things could not be changed. She was human, and humans had a very bad habit of looking at impossible situations and saying, "Let me try anyway." Tomorrow, the Galactic Union would come for that child. Tonight would make sure they found nothing but empty air. Found in a small room on the lower levels of the station, the kind of room they gave to people who had nowhere else to go. It had a bed, a chair, a window that looked out at nothing but metal walls. The lights were dim because no one had bothered to adjust them. Sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She had not changed her clothes since the funeral. She had not eaten. She had not slept. Could see all of this in the way she held herself, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "May I come in?" asked from the doorway. Looked up slowly. Her eyes were the color of old ice, pale and distant. "You are the human commander. I saw you watching today." "Yes, my name is Park." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I wanted to talk to you about." Something flickered in his face, a tiny spark of life in all that grayness. "They are taking her tomorrow. There is nothing to talk about." Sat down in the chair across from her. The seat was hard and uncomfortable, made for species with different bodies than hers. She did not care. What if there was something to talk about? What if there was a way to stop it? Stared at her for a long moment. Among the many species of the galaxy, humans had a certain reputation. They were young. They were loud. They formed attachments too quickly and held onto them too tightly. They made decisions based on feelings rather than logic, and they often suffered for it. Other species considered them strange at best, dangerous at worst. But humans also had another reputation. When they gave their word, they kept it. When they chose to fight, they did not stop. When they decided that something mattered, they would burn down the stars to protect it. Why? Finally asked. You do not know me. You do not know this is not your problem. Thought about how to answer this. She could talk about justice, about morality, about the rights of children. But those were words for politicians and philosophers. She was a soldier, and soldiers spoke in simpler terms. 20 years ago, she said quietly, during the wars on Mai, I had a daughter. Her name was. She was 7 years old when enemy soldiers came to our city. They were taking children, anyone under the age of 12, to camps where they would be raised as loyal citizens of the new regime. I was not home when they came. I was fighting on the front lines, doing my duty, following my orders. She paused. The memory was old, but it still had teeth. By the time I got back was gone. I spent 3 years searching for her. 3 years of hunting through records, breaking into facilities, fighting anyone who stood in my way. And when I finally found where they had taken her, it was too late. His hand rose to her mouth. Her skin flickered with a pale blue color that did not recognize. The camp had been bombed, continued. Not by us, by the enemy's own forces, trying to hide evidence of what they had done. Everyone inside was dead. My daughter and hundreds of other children, killed by the people who claimed to be saving them. The room was very quiet. Outside, the station hummed with the sounds of life and machinery, but in here, there was only silence and grief. I could not save my child, said. I have carried that failure with me every day since. It does not get lighter, it does not go away, but I made a promise to myself in the ruins of that camp. I promised that if I ever had the chance to save another child, I would take it, no matter the cost, no matter the rules, no matter what anyone said. She leaned forward, looking directly into his pale eyes. You made a promise too, to his mother. You swore to take care of her daughter. I am offering you the chance to keep that promise. His breath came faster now. Her skin had started to shift colors, gray giving way to swirls of purple and gold. Hope and fear mixed together like paint on water. How? She whispered. The Galactic Union controls everything. The station, the ships, the laws. I have no money, no power, no connections. I am just one person who happened to survive when better people died. You are not alone, reached out and took his hands in hers. The skin was cool to the touch, smooth like glass. I have friends on this station, people who owe me favors, people who believe, like I do, that laws should protect the innocent, not destroy them. But if you are caught, then I will face the consequences. That is my choice to make, not yours. Squeezed her hands gently. Right now, I need to know one thing. If I can get out of here, if I can give you both a chance to disappear, will you take it? Will you raise her as your own? Will you love her and protect her and make sure she grows up knowing who her parents were? Tears were falling from his eyes now. Not water, but small drops of light that floated upward like tiny stars. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I will. I swear it on everything I am. Nodded and let go of her hands. Good, then we have work to do. She stood up and moved to the door, already running through plans in her mind. They would need access to the holding area where was being kept. They would need false documents, a ship, a destination beyond the reach of the Galactic Union. They would need time, which they did not have, and luck, which could not be counted on. But humans had done impossible things before. They had crawled out of the mud of there and reached for the stars. They had fought wars against enemies that should have crushed them and won. They had faced extinction a dozen times and refused to accept it. One more impossible thing was just Tuesday. Commander Park called out before she could leave. Turned back, yes. Stood up. For the first time since the disaster, she looked alive. Her skin was glowing softly, colors moving across it like aurora lights. Among my people, there is a word for someone who chooses to carry another's burden when they have no obligation to do so. We call them soulkin. It means you have chosen to share your heart with a stranger and make them family. Smiled, it was a small smile, tired around the edges but real. We have a similar concept. We call it being human. She opened the door and stepped out into the corridor. The station was vast and full of dangers, and the clock was ticking. But somewhere in the holding area, a little girl was crying for someone to save her. Intended to be that someone. She pulled out her communication device and sent a brief message to 3 people she trusted with her life. The message contained only 4 words: "Need help. My quarters. Now." Within an hour, she would have a team. Within 6 hours, she would have a plan. Within 12 hours, either would be free or would be in chains. Either way, she would not stand by and watch another child be destroyed. Not again, not ever again. They gathered in quarters like criminals planning a heist, which, in a way, they were. The room was small but private, one of the few places on the station where conversations could happen without being recorded. Had made sure of that years ago, back when she first learned that privacy was worth more than gold. Lieutenant arrived first. He was tall for a human, with broad shoulders and a face that rarely showed emotion. He had served under for 8 years, through 3 major conflicts and a dozen smaller ones. He did not ask questions when she told him to come. He simply came. Doctor arrived second. She was small and sharp, with quick hands and quicker eyes. She ran the medical bay on Station Helix 7 and knew more about alien biology than anyone had ever met. She also had a habit of bending rules when those rules got in the way of saving lives. Chief Engineer arrived last. He was old for this kind of work, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He had spent 30 years in the Terran Federation, building ships and fixing problems and following every regulation ever written. But he was also a grandfather, and when had explained what was happening to Little, something in his face had changed. Now all 4 of them sat in small room, looking at each other with the kind of serious expressions that came before either very good or very bad decisions. "Let me make sure I understand," said slowly. "You want us to kidnap a child from Galactic Union custody, fake her death, smuggle her off this station, and somehow do all of this without getting caught or starting a diplomatic incident?" "That is correct," replied. "And we have less than 20 hours to do it." "Also correct." Was quiet for a moment, then he nodded once as if she had just asked him to help move furniture. "Okay, what do you need from me?" Let out a small laugh. "That's it, no arguments, no questions about whether this is insane." "Oh, it's absolutely insane," said calmly. "But I've known Commander Park for 8 years. If she says this is worth doing, then it's worth doing. Besides," he added, something dark passing through his eyes, "I've read the reports about my sister adopted a child years ago, a little boy who escaped before they could wipe his memories. He still wakes up screaming some nights and he's 40 years old." Cleared his throat. He had been quiet since arriving, his wrinkled hands folded in his lap. "My grandmother," he said, "lived through the occupation of Korea, before we joined the Terran Federation, before we even left Earth. She used to tell me stories about that time, about the laws that said people could be taken from their homes, their families, their identities. She always said the same thing afterward." He looked up at. "She said the law should serve life, not the other way around. She said that anyone who follows an unjust law is just as guilty as those who wrote it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data chip. "This has the access codes for the secondary power grid. If you reroute power at the right moment, you can create a blind spot in the docking bay sensors. Exactly 3 minutes. That should be enough time for a small shuttle to launch without being detected. Took the chip carefully. If they trace this back to you, then I will tell them I made a mistake. Old man failing memory, they might believe it." He smiled, but his eyes were sad. "I have lived a long life, Commander. I have followed every rule, done everything right. And now I am sitting here asking myself what all those rules were for if they let something like this happen to a child. I think my grandmother would be ashamed of me if I did not help." felt something warm spread through her chest. This was what she loved about humans, not their strength or their cleverness or their stubborn refusal to give up. It was this, the way they reached for each other in the darkness, the way they saw a stranger's pain and made it their own. "What about the child's records?" asked. "They have her biometrics, her genetic profile, everything. Even if we get her off the station, they'll be able to track her anywhere in Union space." Raised her hand. Already handled, well, mostly handled. She pulled out her own data chip. "There was a child who died during transport about 3 years ago. Tragic accident, no survivors, body never recovered. Her name was. She was about the same age as, close enough in genetic profile that most scans wouldn't notice the difference." Frowned, "And you just happen to have this information?" "I keep records of all medical cases that pass through this station. Call it a hobby." Shrugged, but there was steel in her eyes. "If we swaps biometric data widths, then as far as the Galactic Union is concerned, died 3 years ago. The child leaving this station will be someone who doesn't officially exist." "That's brilliant," admitted. "Also very illegal." "Most of the best things are." Stood up and walked to the small window in her quarters. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the small dramas of the beings who lived among them. Somewhere on this station, a little girl was sleeping in a holding cell, not knowing that strangers were gathering to save her. Somewhere else was waiting, hopping, praying to whatever gods her people believed in. "There's still the matter of the shuttle," said. "We need a pilot who won't ask questions, a ship that isn't registered with the Union, and a destination where they can disappear." "I know someone," said. "An old contact from my freelance days. She owes me a favor, and she has a fast ship that runs under a different registration every week. If I call her now, she can be here in 6 hours." "And the destination?" "There's a colony on the edge of map space. It's called New Harbor. Small, independent, not part of any major government. A lot of refugees end up there when they have nowhere else to go. The people there don't ask questions about where you came from. They only care about who you want to be." Nodded slowly. It was coming together. A fragile plan built on favors and crimes and the simple belief that kindness was worth fighting for. It could fall apart in 100 different ways. One wrong move, one suspicious official, one piece of bad luck, and they would all end up in prison while was shipped off to have her mind erased. But they were going to try anyway. "We move tonight," decided. "Creates the sensor gap at 300 hours. Handles the biometric switch 1 hour before. Have your contact ready and waiting. I'll get into the docking bay myself." She looked at each of them in turn. Her friends, her crew, her family in every way that mattered. "I want you all to understand something," she said quietly. "What we are doing is dangerous. If we fail, our careers are over. We could spend the rest of our lives in prison. We might even cause a diplomatic crisis between the Terran Federation and the Galactic Union. I am not ordering you to do this. I am asking. And if any of you want to walk away right now, I will understand." No one moved. No one even blinked. "We're with you, Commander," said simply, "to the end." Nodded, smiled his sad wise smile. Felt tears threatening to form in her eyes, but she pushed them back. There would be time for emotions later. Right now, there was a child to save. "Then let's get to work." Everything went wrong at 2:47 hours. Was moving through the lower corridors of the station, at her side and little sleeping in her arms. The child had been sedated lightly, just enough to keep her quiet during transport. Her small face was peaceful now, unaware of the danger surrounding her. Wished she could have that same peace. They had made it past 3 security checkpoints using the false credentials had created. They had avoided the patrol routes that had mapped out. They were exactly 12 minutes ahead of schedule, which in experience usually meant something terrible was about to happen. She was right. The first sign of trouble was the lights. They flickered once, twice, then turned red. Emergency lighting. Somewhere in the station, alarms began to wail. "What is happening?" whispered, her skin flashing between gray and purple with fear. Grabbed her communication device. "Report." Static crackled for a moment before his voice came through, tight with tension. "Someone tipped them off, Commander. I don't know who, but Union security is mobilizing. They've locked down all the docking bays." His blood went cold. "All of them." "All of them. I'm trying to find another way out, but—" His voice cut off as more static filled the channel. Made a small sound of despair. In her arms stirred but did not wake. "It's over," she breathed. "They've caught us." "No," his voice was hard as stone. "It's not over until I say it's over. Come with me." She turned and started moving faster through the corridors, taking routes she had memorized years ago, paths that did not appear on any official map. Emergency access tunnels, maintenance shafts, places where a desperate person could hide if they were clever enough. But the station was not that large, and the security forces were moving quickly. Within minutes, could hear boots pounding on metal floors behind them, voices shouting orders, the high whine of weapons being charged. She led into Docking Bay 7, the most remote bay on the station. It was used mainly for cargo ships and maintenance vessels, not passenger shuttles. If contact was anywhere, she would be here. The bay was empty. No ship waited for them. No friendly pilot with a fast vessel, and no questions. Just cold metal floors and distant stars visible through the force field that kept the vacuum of space at bay. "No," moaned. "No, no, no." Before could respond, the main doors of the docking bay slid open. A squad of Union security officers poured through, their weapons raised and ready. At their head was a tall figure from a species called the massive beings with 4 arms and faces like carved granite. His name, according to his uniform, was Vex. "Commander Park," Vex announced, his voice echoing through the empty bay. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit child trafficking, falsification of official documents, and interference with Galactic Union legal proceedings. Surrender the child immediately." Stepped forward, placing herself between the officers, and behind her, she could feel the woman trembling, clutching so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "That child has a name," said, her voice steady despite the weapons pointed at her chest. She is 3 years old. She likes to sing. She is afraid of the dark. And you want to erase all of that because a law written by strangers says you should." Vex did not blink. His stone face showed no emotion at all. "The law is the law, Commander. It applies to everyone equally, regardless of sentiment." "Does it?" Took another step forward. The officers shifted nervously, but none of them fired. "Tell me, Officer Vex, have you ever seen what happens to children in the— Have you watched them come out with empty eyes and hollow smiles, not remembering who they were or who loved them? Have you held a grown adult who still screams in their sleep because somewhere deep inside, they know something was stolen from them?" A flicker of something passed across Vex's face. Doubt, discomfort. It was hard to tell with, "That is not my concern. My concern is enforcing the law." "Then the law is broken," said. "And anyone who enforces a broken law is just as responsible for the damage it causes." Behind her had woken up. The little girl was crying softly, confused and scared, reaching for space with tiny hands. The sound filled the silent docking bay like a knife cutting through fabric. One of the security officers, a young female from a species did not recognize, lowered her weapon slightly. Her large eyes were wet with what might have been tears. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "perhaps we could." "Quiet," Vex snapped. "This is not a discussion, this is an arrest." Smiled then. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose and knew exactly what cards they were holding. "Before you arrest me," she said calmly, "you should know something. My second-in-command, Lieutenant, is currently in the station's central control room. He has been recording this entire conversation and broadcasting it to every human vessel within 3 light years. Every word you say, every action you take is being watched by the Terran Federation. Vex's stone face finally showed emotion, surprise followed by anger. You're bluffing. Am I? Smile widened. Check your communication systems if you don't believe me, but think carefully about what happens next. You can arrest me. You can take this child. But then you will have to explain to the Terran Federation why you pointed weapons at one of their officers over a 3-year-old orphan. You will have to justify erasing a child's memories to an entire species that considers such things to be among the worst possible crimes. She stepped even closer to Vex, so close that she could see her own reflection in his dark eyes. We humans have a reputation, she said softly. We're pack animals. We take care of our own, and over the past few hours this child has become one of our own. So ask yourself, Officer Vex, is this really worth a war? The docking bay was silent except for soft crying. One of the security officers shifted uncomfortably. She has a point, sir. The humans. They're not like other species. If they think we're hurting children, they'll never let it go. They'll keep coming. They always keep coming. Vex stood motionless for a long moment. His 4 hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Behind him, his officers watched with uncertain eyes, waiting for orders that could change everything. Finally, Vex let out a long breath. This matter, he said slowly, is above my authority. I will contact my superiors and request guidance on how to proceed. Until then, you will remain here under guard. The child will not be transferred until the situation is clarified. It was not a victory, not yet, but it was time for the message to spread, time for others to see what was happening, time for the galaxy to decide what kind of place it wanted to be. Nodded once, that's all I ask, a chance to be heard. Behind her, let out a sob of relief. Still crying, reached out toward the lights above as if trying to catch stars with her tiny fingers. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the message had sent was spreading. Human vessels were changing course. Human voices were raising questions. Human anger, slow to build but impossible to stop, was beginning to wake. The galaxy had watched a woman mourn alone. Now it was about to learn what happened when humans decided to care. The tribunal lasted 6 days. Sat in a chair that was too small for her, facing a panel of judges from 7 different species, answering the same questions over and over again. Why had she broken the law? Did she understand the consequences? Did she feel any remorse for her actions? Her answers never changed. I broke the law because the law was wrong. Yes, I understand the consequences. No, I do not feel remorse. I would do it again tomorrow if I had to. Outside the tribunal chambers, something remarkable was happening. The broadcast that had sent from the control room had reached far beyond human vessels. Citizens, learning for the first time what really happened were demanding answers from their government. Protests filled the streets of Velar Prime, millions of glowing bodies marching with signs that read, "Remember their names," and "Children are not property." Other species joined the outcry. Whose own history included dark chapters of forced education camps, released a statement condemning the practice. The one by one, voices rose from across the galaxy, asking how such a thing had been allowed to continue for so long. On the 4th day of the tribunal, something changed. The representative, an elderly female with skin that shimmered between silver and gold, stood up and requested permission to speak. The government, she announced, her voice carrying across the silent chamber, has conducted a review of the in light of recent events. The findings have been disturbing. We have discovered that the procedures used on orphan children were far more invasive than previously reported. Memory erasure was not therapeutic, as we had been told. It was systematic destruction of identity. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The other judges exchanged glances. In light of these findings, the representative continued. The government has decided to suspend all operations at the pending a complete investigation. Furthermore, we are withdrawing our claim to the child known as. She will be released to the custody of citizen who has demonstrated her commitment to the child's welfare. Sat very still, afraid to move, afraid to hope. Additionally, the representative said, her eyes meeting across the room, the government wishes to formally thank Commander Park for bringing this matter to our attention. While her methods were unorthodox, her compassion has exposed a great injustice. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what those inside have chosen to ignore. The chief judge, a massive being from a species that looked like a walking coral reef, rumbled deep in its chest. This is highly irregular. Commander Park still violated multiple Galactic Union statutes. She did, another judge agreed, but the circumstances were extraordinary, and the outcome, the judge paused, glancing at a data tablet. Public opinion across multiple sectors strongly favors leniency. Punishing Commander Park harshly at this point could cause more problems than it solves. After 2 more days of deliberation, the tribunal reached its verdict. Was found guilty of violating Galactic Union regulations. Her punishment was a formal reprimand to be placed in her permanent record. No prison time, no removal from command, just a piece of paper that said she had done something wrong. When the verdict was read, kept her face calm and professional, but inside her heart was singing. The day in left Station Helix 7 was bright with artificial sunlight. The transport that would take them to New Harbor was waiting in Docking Bay 4, a small but fast vessel piloted by Contact, a cheerful woman with bright red hair and a habit of talking to her ship like it was a pet. Stood at the entrance to the docking bay, watching gather the small bag of belongings she had managed to collect. Was in her arms, wide awake now, her large eyes taking in everything around her with the curiosity that only children possess. "I don't know how to thank you," said, her skin glowing with soft colors of gratitude and hope. "What you did, what you risked, I can never repay it." Shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. Just raise that little girl well, teach her about her parents, let her know she was loved by them and by us." Nodded, tears of light floating upward from her eyes. Then she stepped forward and embraced with one arm, the other still holding close. The woman's skin was warm against cheek, pulsing with colors that spoke of emotions beyond words. "Soulkin," whispered, "that is what you are, my soul's family across the stars." When they separated, was looking at with serious eyes. The little girl reached out one tiny hand and touched face, her small fingers tracing the lines around her eyes. "Thank you," said. Her voice was soft and uncertain, the voice of a child who was only beginning to understand what had happened. "For being nice." His heart cracked open. She smiled at the little girl, a real smile that reached all the way to her soul. "You're welcome, little one. Now go with, she's going to take good care of you." Smiled back, a flash of brightness on her small face. Then was carrying her toward the transport and was watching them go, and the docking bay felt very large and very empty. Appeared at her side, his arms crossed over his chest. "Quite a week," he said. "That's one way to describe it. You know this isn't the end, right? The might be suspended, but there are other systems like it across the galaxy. Other children being hurt by laws that were supposed to protect them." Watch the transport begin its pre-flight sequence, lights blinking, engines humming. "I know. So what are we going to do about it?" She turned to look at him. Her friend, her brother in arms, one of the many humans who had chosen to stand beside her when everything could have fallen apart. "Whatever we have to," she said. "One child at a time, one battle at a time, until the galaxy learns that we don't leave family behind." Nodded slowly. A small smile appeared on his usually serious face. "Sounds like a plan." The transport lifted off, passing through the force field and into the darkness of space. watched until it was just another point of light among billions, carrying a woman and a child toward a future that had almost been stolen from them. She thought about the representative's words. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what those inside have chosen to ignore. That was what humans were, she realized. Outsiders. They had come late to the galactic community, younger than almost every other species, still rough around the edges and prone to making messes. But maybe that was their purpose. Maybe they were meant to be the ones who looked at injustice and refused to accept it. The ones who asked uncomfortable questions. The ones who broke rules that needed breaking. The galaxy had watched Mourn alone, expecting her to accept her fate quietly. They had not expected a human to step forward. They had not understood that when humans saw suffering, they could not look away. When they saw injustice, they could not stay silent. When they saw a child in need, they would move mountains and stars and governments to help. It was not always pretty, it was not always legal, but it was human. And sometimes, being human was exactly what the galaxy needed. Turned away from the window and walked back toward the heart of the station. There was paperwork to file, reports to write, and a formal reprimand to acknowledge. There were also messages flooding in from across the galaxy, from other species who wanted to know more about what had happened, who wanted to understand why humans cared so much about one small child. She would answer them all. She would tell the story of ordinary people who had chosen to do extraordinary things. She would explain that humans were not dangerous because they were strong or clever or numerous. They were dangerous because they cared. And that made all the difference.